Hi there, I'm Colin Morgan, the executive producer of Built to Sell Radio. And if you've been enjoying this podcast, you're going to absolutely love our new newsletter, Built to Sell News. We share actionable tips and insights to help you get inside the mind of an acquirer to punch above your weight when it comes time to exit. To subscribe, head over to builttosell.com/subscribe.
Jessica DeLuca, welcome to Built to Sell Radio. I'm so excited to talk about cult beauty because this is a big deal. Like, for many of our listeners in the US, they would be aware of Sephora and some of the other big e-commerce kind of retailers. But you guys are the biggest e-commerce, beauty retailer in the UK. Like, you're a big deal. So I'm excited to learn this story. I've heard from different folks about the company. So there's a lot for us to dig into. But I want to go back to the beginning. How did this thing start? How did you get started?
So, let's see, my background is in tech, and I kind of think in databases. I like to categorize things, everything to be neatly labeled and categorized. So I learned SQL and HTML in the early days of I don't want to say the early days of technology, but the early days of internet in 2000, 2001, 2002. And I was working on large scale web applications for investment banks in the UK. A lot of them having to do with accounting, which was not that thrilling as subject matter for me. But I was earning decent money, and I was 29 going on 30 and starting to think, maybe I should start investing in my skincare routine. And I was working in Canary Wharf for a large investment bank. And during lunch, I went across the street to a bricks and mortar beauty retailer. And the experience just left me kind of less than impressed. I couldn't get the information I was looking for. I felt I wanted to be able to do comparison in my own time. And I didn't. Yeah, I couldn't find the actual information. I wanted to be able to go away and do some research, compare products, and I started looking around to see if that existed, and it didn't.
Did you have like allergies or skin sensitivities that made it important that you got a specific type of skincare, or was there some reason that you were so inquisitive about the ingredients?
I think so I think it was more about the access to advice. So what I realized was that most of the retailers have salespeople that are very well informed about the products that they sell and a few specific brands, and they focused on those specific brands. But there were experts, and there still are experts out there whose job is to basically get the A-list ready for the red carpet. And the A-list bread and butter depends on what they look like. So there are people that are really looking into what are the most effective products on the market. And I'm possibly a little OCD about that. I grew up with a father who is addicted to Consumer Reports. So, you've got to do your research and find the very best. And then I started looking into, who would that be? And I saw the InStyle Best Beauty Buys Guide. And it's an insert that comes out a couple of times a year with InStyle, and it's beautifully photographed. It has excerpts around each product that is picked as being best in class from a panel of experts who help the A-list get ready for the red carpet. So I started thinking about how I could get more of this information. With the InStyle insert, I couldn't click through and read more about this ingredient and why did this expert recommend this particular product. But I thought if I could create a database that had all of this information, if I could interview these experts and break down why they're recommending this particular product to this particular person. So what are the specific concerns? What age range? What skin tone? What hair type? And how the different ingredients would address those, and put that into a database that was then searchable, and then I could democratize that information. So as an example, one of the experts that I recruited for Cult Beauty, I think her day rate at the time was about 30,000 pounds. And you just can't.
Kidding me?
And that's
30,000 pounds? That's insane.
Well, then that was 17 years ago. So she's a lot of these makeup artists have become billionaires in their own rights for launching their own line.
I had no idea this industry existed because, of course, the different products work differently for different people. And it's funny. I went into, I kind of had a very tiny snapshot of this in the summertime because I'm like a wrinkly old man and getting wrinklier by the day. I went into L'Occitane. I was shopping with my wife. We went in, and there was a woman there in like a white, doctor's coat, and she was like, "Tell me what you're in for." And I was like, "Oh, I got this like dry, wrinkly skin." And she took me to the product. There were 3 products, and she said the one product, but obviously there were 3 choices, and she chose the one that was best for a wrinkly old man. But I didn't look at the other 1,000 moisturizers out there that are probably even better than the ones that I was looking at. So this is kind of cool. I'm starting to understand the business model. Because my first question for you, when I looked at Cult Beauty, I'm like, yeah, but like, what's the value add? You can go, like, I'm looking at all the brands you sell. I think there's one called like Drunk Elephant or something like that. And then I'm like, I wonder if Drunk Elephant, you can just go to drunkelephant.co.uk or whatever and buy it. And sure enough, you can. And so I was like, well, what's the value prop? You're just aggregating a bunch of brands that you can just go buy direct. So why wouldn't you buy direct? Now I'm starting to understand the essence of the business model. It was the advice that the searchable database, the advice that you were providing to these customers. Am I getting it?
Yeah. And the curation and the discovery aspect as well. So like if we rewind to 2007, when I designed the website and built the business plan, the beauty industry was run by 3 big conglomerates who own most of the brands that you see in department stores: LVMH, Estee Lauder, and L'Oreal. And those conglomerates dictated to the department stores where their concessions are located, what the promotions will be. Like they ran the industry. They were the biggest spenders of advertising revenue in the glossy magazines. And remember, this is before the term influencer even existed. So there were a few things that set us apart that are now just everybody does it because it's been proven to work. So I understood the importance of search engine optimization. So I really insisted on focusing on beauty bloggers. They're now called influencers. And they're very, 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 well, the word is influential and also expensive now. But back in 2007, 2008, 2009, and 2010, hardly anyone was paying attention. The other brands were chasing coverage in glossy magazines, but the influencers are really passionate about beauty products and ingredients and health and well-being. I mean, the impact of the ingredients is so huge. There's a statistic by the Soil Association here that depending on the size of the molecule, up to 60% of the ingredients of what you put on your skin is absorbed into your bloodstream. So it's really important to understand what's in your products. So we were the first to publish full ingredients lists. Johnson & Johnson is currently going through an enormous multi-billion-dollar settlement about talc in their products. And talc was one of the ingredients listed in the advanced search that I designed that you could avoid. So we were like starting to highlight, there have been traces of lead found in lipstick, and lead has been tied to neurological damage in unborn babies, but there's no warning label on the lipstick for a pregnant woman. So there's, sorry, I've gone off on a tangent there, but there's a lot of the importance of taking an education first approach hadn't occurred to anyone else yet. And it occurred to me because it's what I wanted. And I think building what you want, if it doesn't exist, is one of the best routes to starting a successful company, because if I'm looking for it, there's probably a few other people in my similar situation who are looking for a similar solution.
Absolutely. Scratching your own itch, one of the kind of classic ways to build a business. But this
Mm.
business does not sound cheap to build. Uh, I think a lot of people dream of having an e-commerce website, and then they run into the reality of the expense required to get not only the business off the ground, but also the demand people to start shopping. So this is not a cheap business to start. How did you go about starting this business? Did you raise money? Walk me through the financing.
Well, I had a bit of an advantage because I knew HTML and SQL, and I could build a functional spec, and I was used to working with developers. When I was starting Cult Beauty, the cheapest off-the-shelf e-commerce solution was $500,000, $500,000, and I certainly didn't have anywhere near that. I stepped back. I agreed a contract role with the bank that I was working for, and I would contract 3 days per week for them and work 4 days per week on Cult Beauty. So I funded it a lot, most of the development that way. My uncle had also sold a business, and he loaned me $10,000 to get the website finished. But I think me being able to design and what's the word for because I didn't do the actual development of it, but I could design I could do the wireframes, I could do the design of the database, I could explain how the transaction should work. I built out what I think is the first AI algorithm in the beauty industry, and then I could supervise the developers, and I knew testing. I knew how to bring software to market. So I had a big advantage there that I didn't need to spend $500,000 on e-commerce, which really only very big companies could do at that time. And also because there were so few of us, the route to market was a lot cheaper. So beauty bloggers, like I mentioned, who are now influencers that are very expensive to work with, were free at the time. It was PR, reaching out to them, sending them products from our brands. That was one of the highest ROI investments that we made, because those links were there forever. So they helped us get to the top of the organic search results for Google. And the beauty bloggers had their own following because they had their own passions. So we were tapping into their followings.
If I may, I'd love to ask just about the product lineup as well. Again, I spent some time on Copy before the call, and my sense was that that you're offering boutique high-end brands, but my point was these are not your own homegrown brands. You are effectively reselling other brands. Mm-hmm. Is that accurate? And that's been the way that the business. Okay, got it. So you didn't necessarily need to go through the expense of creating your own formula, your own brand. You were effectively reselling someone else's brand. Did those brands make you buy volume up front when you first started the company, like commit to a certain volume?
There were so many complications with brand recruitment at the beginning. We started off with a drop ship model, and actually, we started off with the drop ship model. A lot of the brands found that it was just it was a pain to log into the Cult Beauty CMS and download the packing slip. And they just asked if we would just hold on to the products for them. And we branded that managed distribution, and we increased the margin that we took from 30% for drop ship to 50%. So we got to a standard retail margin just with a little bit of branding. And back in 2007 and 2008, the UK, the UK was significantly behind the US in e-commerce adoption. So approaching some brands, I remember a French brand saying to us, we love the ethos of what you're doing, but we don't want to be on eBay. They literally couldn't comprehend that there was another website than eBay. The web was eBay to them. And the reason that there's a few Cult Beauty branded items, but the reason that Cult Beauty doesn't have its own range is because I had a lot of rules of thumb built into the business model. And one of the rules of thumb was that no one could recommend any product that they had a financial interest in. So if Cult Beauty if we manufactured our own products, yes, there's a bigger startup cost, but then our margins would be enormous for that brand. And we'd be skewed to more likely recommending those products rather than being completely agnostic and just recommending based on performance. And this went for our experts as well. So some of them had built incredibly successful brands and exited and were living on their private islands. And they would recommend products like Como Shambhala's body wash from being at Parrot Key in the Caribbean. So we had this inside view of what they're really using. And one of them said the most fabulous thing. He just said, "It's not about my sponsorship deals. It's about what's in my kit bag." So when we were recruiting the brands, the experts would send in their top 10 must-have products. And that's how we built our original curated product mix.
So you would say, look, this beauty blogger who has this incredible influence on the market in their makeup bag has your product. And so they're going to recommend it. So we need to retail it. So
actually, no. The expert panel were the dermatologists and makeup artists and hairstylists that were getting the A-listers ready for the red carpet. So for the story that I just told, that was Charles Worthington. And Charles Worthington, I don't know if he's as well known in the US as he is in the UK, but he's kind of the Vidal Sassoon of the UK. And he's a great guy. And he's like, but my hair products are the best. I'm not recommending any other hair products. However, take a look at Como Shambhala. And through that, the president of Free People, who had recently been to Como Shambhala or had recently been to Parrot Key, got in touch with us to say, "Hey, we really like what you're doing." And that became a fantastic connection and mentorship relationship for me because Meg is a very successful retailer. Charles is a very successful business owner, and we were able to attract that kind of customer because our experts were recommending those types of products. I'm sorry, I do have. My mother is allowed to get through all of my do not disturbs.
That's a good distinction. I'm now starting to sort of get a sense of the business. So you had these beauty bloggers who you were building relationships with, but in addition to that, you also had an expert panel. These were dermatologists and professionals who were recommending product. How did you compensate the expert panel?
Through PR. So we just not very many people were paying attention to them. Remember, this is pre-Instagram. This is pre-Twitter. There weren't many platforms that were interested or talking to them. So they were our inbound product advice and obviously experts in terms of helping us. Experts in terms of helping us determine what the product mix should be. And then the bloggers were really our key go-to-market. So that was our key marketing channel.
Got it. And so that's how I think I've now got a sense of how the business started. That's a great description. Walk me through, if you could, where things go from there. I understand at one point you raised some money. I'd be curious to know what triggered that decision.
So what we were finding was that we were able to find the coolest brands first. So actually, and not all of them were hugely expensive. One of them was called Lucas Papaw. It was out of Australia, and I think it was about £5. And it was one of our top sellers. So we would find the coolest, most innovative, most in-demand products. The bloggers would love them. The beauty journalists, beauty directors would love them. And then we get these great pieces of PR. And then our competitors that were 100 times bigger than, or more bigger than we were at the time, would go in with a much bigger check and say, we'd like an exclusive. So we would do all the heavy lifting of discovering these brands and then building this brand. And then somebody would just come and take the brand away from us. So I wanted to be in a position where I could write a big enough check to get an exclusive that then built a moat for us to have 6 months to a year of investing our time and efforts in PR and marketing the brand. And actually, Meg from Free People from Urban Group was instrumental in that. Her executive director for strategy and acquisition invited me to pitch at an event in New York called Fashion Vest. And I wrote a presentation, practice. I was so nervous. My mouth was dry. There was water on the podium, but my hands were shaking so much that I couldn't actually get it to my lips. And afterward, VC came up to me and he said, well, you're obviously nervous, but you seem to be doing pretty well. Here's my card. We don't invest in the UK, but I'll connect you with a partner in the London office. And he did. And that was William Reeve of Love Film.
Okay, I'm not familiar. That's a VC firm in the UK.
Oh, sorry. Love Film was the UK's version of Netflix that was acquired by Amazon in 2010. I believe it was 2010. And William is a prolific investor and serial entrepreneur over here, and eventually became a cult beauty investor. And he also is very well connected in the e-commerce and entrepreneurial ecosystem in the UK. So he knew who had just exited and was looking to invest. So I didn't need an enormous check. I think I raised £250,000, and that's more angel level than it is VC. So he introduced me to a few founders who had just exited, and two of them were from Net-a-Porter, which revolutionized fashion online in a similar way to Cult Beauty revolutionizing beauty online. And they had just exited and were ready to write checks.
Got it. So to be clear, you wanted to lock up these brands and write a big enough check that you could garner exclusivity for a period of time. To do that, you needed to raise money, and you met this fellow William, and he introduced you to some rich people who wrote some checks, and in total it was £250,000. I'd be curious, how did you structure those investments? I mean, were they loans? Were they equity? Were they convertible debt? Like, what was the actual technical sort of structure of that money raise?
They were equity. This is pre-AngelList. Actually, a couple of my investors founded a very similar company called Seed Legals over here that really helps founders with this issue now. But I didn't have a soul to ask really about how to structure the deal. So I raised I actually, the very first round of funding that I did was in 2008 or 9 for £36,000. And what I didn't understand then was dilution. So I just sold part of my own equity, even though I'd already given equity to other co-founders of the company. So I didn't understand that everybody gets diluted and like how to build a cap table. And this is before this information is available on Google. I'd literally gone to the bookstore and bought How to Start a Business for Dummies, UK edition. And it addresses things like getting a bank account and some legal stuff, but it certainly didn't address fundraising. So I made a lot of mistakes in fundraising, but we got there.
But I think a lot of our listeners are probably leaning into the conversation right now because they are also maybe not sophisticated financiers who spend their time reading deep technical manuals about how to raise money. So I think the extent to which you're willing to share those mistakes would be helpful. So in the beginning, you raised £36,000, and this was just basically taking the equity you owned and parsing off some of it to those people. How did you figure out how much to give them? Like, how did you put a value on the company in those early days? And how did you figure out what their investment was worth in terms of a slice of the pie?
This was friends and family, and I really just pulled the number out of nowhere. And I probably undervalued it. I probably undervalued it. I just thought, well, £6,000 for 1% of the company. Okay. That seems, it was, very amateur. I did, but I just didn't know. I didn't know who to ask. I just didn't know anyone in that space yet.
Got it. And what was your turnover at that time when you were selling 1% for £6,000? I'm trying to figure out how you valued the whole thing.
I'm trying to remember if so. This was the fall of 2008, and the website had gone live in June of 2008. Our first year, we did £90,000 of revenue, but we're 5 months in. And this, I raised this specific amount of money to get a work visa for a critical employee. So someone who's was able to write good copy, find good products, and was also quite good at branding. So she was a great find, but she's American, and we need to get a work visa. So it was literally just to get that, just to make sure we had that person. And it probably saved us. Well, it cost me quite a lot of equity. So it probably cost me, it did literally cost me millions to do this. But at the time, trying to hire 3 different people would have been a huge expense for the company. And that would have been much more difficult to raise with an unproven company.
And then how did the valuation evolve in your sort of the 250,000 friends and family round? Again, was that sort of £6,000 for 1%, or did you at that point had you gotten sort of more sophisticated in your thinking, or what was it like then?
Yeah, I had, and I had access to more information by that point, and more mentorship. Also, I had multiple interested parties, which I think is critical. If there's one, and I learned that the hard way as well. After I came back from pitching at Fashion Vest, I put together a deal sheet with someone that had been that I knew through one of the co-founders' cousins who'd done a little bit of work in VC, but in a completely different industry. And we floated it. And one of the high street billionaires over here decided that he wanted to invest the entire $250,000. And I'm very green. at this, and he, during due diligence, stretched the process out for 5 months. He just always wanted a little bit more information and a little bit more information. And, he'd snapped up the deal so quickly. We hadn't really talked to anyone else about it yet. So there were no competing offers. And at one point he went to an independent valuation expert who said that, or who he got to say that the company was worth £250,000 anyway. So he would take it off our hands for £250,000. He is no longer a billionaire. So I think he's made some more bad decisions. And he missed out on a huge opportunity, but I just said no, floated it again. And this is where I went to William, and Net-a-Porter had just sold in October of 2010. And this is May or June of 2011. And William had introduced me to multiple people who all really understood e-commerce. Through another one of my friends, there was a trader in the city, in the financial district here, who wanted to invest because there were tax incentives. So he was looking for a tax break. And then I sat down with one of the co-founders of Net-a-Porter, who looked at the business model. And because they just sold Net-a-Porter for $500 million, he instantly got it and instantly saw how massive it could be. And Net-a-Porter is a huge name here and in the US. So as soon as he was interested, then everybody else that had been a little bit interested all wanted to be in on this deal. It's it's competitive tension, isn't it? So once one person wants you, then everybody wants you. So at that point, the terms were no longer being dictated to me. At that point, I could then get terms that I was comfortable with. Not to say I knew what terms would serve me best or serve our existing shareholders best in the long run. But we ended up with pretty decent terms. They were pretty ethical investors. We were very, and also very strategic for us, because they had experience of doing exactly what I wanted to do in the beauty industry, in the fashion industry.
So what were the terms they invested on?
They had ordinary shares. So we had another round later where we brought in not a private equity firm, but the man who owns the private equity firm invested personally. And at that point, we got into preferential shares. But at this point, all the Net-a-Porter co-founders asked for were board seats, which was fine. I wanted them on the board.
They got ordinary shares like yours, equivalent sort of rights as yours, and a board seat. And how much of the company did they get for their $250,000?
Oh man, I need to look back at the cap table, because we were going back 13 years ago. I do, off the top of my head, I don't remember. I don't remember.
Got it. But at the original outset, you were, I'm backing into £6,000 for 1%. So you were.
Oh, so what? Yeah. So what valuation were we? I think that most of our fundraising rounds after that 6% one fell into basically each time you raise money, you're giving away about 20% of the company. I think.
Yeah.
And I didn't, and also the exit was more than 3 years ago. So I just haven't been looking at these numbers, and I thought about looking at the cap table before our discussion, and I just didn't review.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, because again, these businesses, high profile, direct to consumer, they I have seen that they do get very expensive to build. At what point did the influencers start to charge you? Because in the beginning, they were doing this almost out of the goodness of their heart, but I'm assuming at some point they were like, no, no, our recommendations are worth something. How did that
Well, also,
affect
and also
business
we
model?
were also then able to not just not just work with influencers in exchange for product, but also do pay-per-click ads. So so yes, at a certain point we started spending money on marketing. Most of our influencer, I think because we were such early pioneers of it, and we also had so many followers as well. Most of it were collaborations. So we would do things like invite influencers. Caroline Hirons, for instance, she's, I don't want to use the word savant, but she has a genius around product curation and product development. And we would do a collaborative box of her curation with her. So it was more collaborations than just writing checks, because also, look, we sold in 2021, so it's still on the earlier side for when influencers blew up. So probably 3 to 4 years before we sold, there started to be a cost associated with working with influencers, like a check writing cost, rather than a giving product and and spending time on the collaboration. Because obviously everything has time, and everything has a cost. But like specifically writing a check.
Yeah.
But
How
it's
big
a
did you
very
get this
different time
business?
period than now.
Yeah, it's evolved for sure, even in the last few years, as I understand. It's not a world I understand terribly well, but just at a superficial level. How big did you get Cult Beauty before you decided to sell, like in terms of turnover or number of employees, whatever you're comfortable sharing?
Well, when we sold, we had 287 jobs. Um, we let's see. I mean, the company was at a revenue of about 120 million sterling when we decided we were ready to sell. And Net-a-Porter had gone before us. So Net-a-Porter was founded in 1998. Cult Beauty was founded in 2007. So seeing how they were a trailblazer. So seeing what they had sold for, they were doing 120 million US when they sold for $500 million. But they were an earlier. It was an earlier time, and there was and I think probably bigger hype around e-commerce at that time. So I think that 120 million was it was a gold number. Was after reading about, not just reading about, but also being able to discuss with the co-founders, that seemed like a reasonable size. It was the size that they knew as well. Even though,
and did you think Cult Beauty would be s- similarly valued at what appears to be around 4 times revenue? Like, was that what your thought was in terms of your aspiration
well,
at the time?
I hoped so. Our margins, the beauty industry margins, are better than the fashion industry margins. And then another fashion multi-brand retailer had just sold for about 3.8x. But we didn't get. I mean, we didn't get any. Yeah, we didn't get anywhere near that. So yes, we absolutely hoped, because wow, I mean, that would have been. So it's, I think, 180 times 4. I mean, that obviously would have been a massive exit for us. Obviously, we had
Yeah,
a massive exit, and also, even though I wasn't. I was very green with knowing what a cap table is. I incentivized a lot of the team with equity. So when we exited, Cult Beauty created 29 new millionaires. We were able to give out over 5 million in staff bonuses for people whose options wouldn't have vested in time for it to be tax efficient. And several people also made life-changing amounts of money, like especially like warehouse staff that have been with us for quite a long time, making several £100,000. That's, it's that moves from being a renter to property ownership. So that was really thrilling. I think, I wanted to get to a place where the people that had supported us were going to see their lives were going to be changed for the better before we sold. So
amazing. So that was part of your motivation to maximize the valuation. The people that had supported you, you wanted to do right by them. It sounds like that was a key part of the motivation to maximize. Was there a discussion at the board level prior to exiting, just as you're building the company, were you talking regularly about valuation? Were you discussing the 3.8 that the multi-brand retailer got and said, well, maybe we could do that? Or was it a topic of conversation or not really?
It is a topic of conversation. It's a topic of conversation with the investment banks that pitch for the deal. So
before you decided to sell, though, was it a topic of conversation? Like years before, just the board having regular interactions? Was it just a topic that came up on a regular basis?
In terms of the multiple or how it was going to be valued?
Yeah.
No, we also have, we could have casual, non-board conversations about it too. So it wasn't usually at the board meetings. And actually, of the things that I can talk, I mean, the financials of the company were highly publicized and they're publicly available in the UK. But I am bound by confidentiality about board meetings. So
okay,
there I can't share as much. But it's very different than the US. But I can talk a lot about money, but I can't talk about the conversations that were had.
Discussion. Okay, super helpful. Sorry to take us in that direction, but that's great. So you're building this company. You're over £100 million turnover. This is a significant business. Was there a trigger that caused you to want to sell?
The moment that we took investment, I felt a moral obligation to sell the company. And we took investment in cash, but we also took investment in time. So our buyer, her name is Stacia Prince, and she is a complete rock star, the best, hands down, indisputed in the industry, had a very successful career of 20 years in the beauty industry and in retail before meeting me. And Stacia gave up a very well paid position to work with me on Cult Beauty because she believed in the ethos of what I was trying to do, of becoming the most trusted beauty retailer in the world, telling the truth and bringing integrity and transparency to the industry. And Stacia agreed to work on commission. So the brands that she brought in, she would get a percentage of the revenue from the brands that she brought in. So she also got equity in the company. Stacia's first check, I think I can say this. Well, Stacia, I don't think she's going to get mad at me for saying this. I believe was £4.37. But she had dedicated a lot of time and talent and her contacts, her expertise. She mentored me. She helped guide me. she didn't, I mean, she deserves more than £4.37 for that. She also had invested in later rounds. She also invested in the company. So the people that wrote checks to us, a lot of them were my parents. They were co-founders' parents. They were friends of mine, my aunt, and once they weren't, I would say they weren't interest-free loans. So it was, I felt a moral obligation to make a return to anyone who had invested their time or money, because they invested it with a very reasonable expectation of a return. Except for my parents and my aunt, who all went, we just never thought we'd see this money again. I can't believe you did this. This is amazing.
That must have felt good. So there's an expectation that when you raised your first dollar of external money, that you knew you were going to sell at some point. But I'd be curious, what was the straw that broke the camel's back? What event took place that made you decide, okay, now's the time?
Yeah, I think I had enough conversations with other entrepreneurs that had exited that I understood that venture capital funds and private equity funds have their own like investment cycles that they're expected to return. They're expected to make returns within that window. And I remember one very successful serial entrepreneur over here saying, when you're deciding what you're going to do next, you have to really think about it, because it's the next 3 to 10 years of your life. So once we hit that 10-year mark, I was really starting to feel that it was time to start making good on our promise to return some cash to our investors.
So what did you do next? What was the process like for you? Did you hire a banker? Did you take it to market yourself? What was that like?
We did. Yeah, we hired, we had multiple investment banks pitch. Some of this is how we decided and how that was, and I'm sorry, because I know that is really crucial and interesting, but that is all board minuted. And, but the process is that you write up basically a deal sheet for the company, ask whatever connections you have through investors or friends or yourself for recommendations and introductions to investment bankers. And you do lots of research on the investment bankers to see who else have they sold? What other deals have they done? Do they know people within your industry? Because that's mostly who's going to be interested in buying in buying you. If it's a trade deal, if you're not, I don't think if you're not doing an IPO, you're usually looking for a trade acquisition. So you're doing your due diligence, and then the investment banks will come back to you with pitches for who's going to be on their team, what deals those specific individuals have done, what they think the comparative transactions, recent transactions are. So they will set expectations for what kind of multiple they think they'll be able to achieve, how much they're going to charge in terms of a percentage of the deal and or other fees, and a timeline that they believe that they can hit. And then as a board, generally, you would come together and assess. You would meet the individual bankers and get a feeling for who you believe, who, your gut obviously is the source of so much wisdom and knows so much more than what your head does so many times. So who you get a good feeling from, who you're impressed by, what the numbers end up looking like. Who do you believe? Do you really think that this bank can get you this multiple on your revenue or on your EBITDA, when this bank is saying, well, we think we can do this, and you just make a decision as you would with any other any other supplier of a service.
Jessica's, and I'll just talk directly to my listeners for a second, Jessica, because you're referring to investment bankers in the UK, often referred to as corporate finance professionals. In America, for smaller companies, it's usually referred to as an M&A professional,
Mhm.
and for more retail or Main Street businesses, a business broker, effectively offering a similar service, just bigger and bigger companies. So M&A professional, kind of 10 to 100 million, maybe investment banker, 100 million plus. Those are arbitrary numbers, but just so folks know that you're referring to an investment banker, which is the same basic set of job description that an M&A professional would have, just maybe a different label and a different size company. So you
Exactly.
hire an investment
Definitely. It
banking.
was M&A professionals that we were working with. Exactly.
Got it. So you hire a firm. What was the reaction from the marketplace? Did you get any? Obviously, you got one letter of intent, but like, how much interest did you get?
We got a lot of interest. We had actually been fielding some inbound inquiries for a few years, and we ended up with a few indications of interest, and then you go through a process where the potential acquirer signs an NDA, and they get a certain level of access to data. And after that phase, they'll submit an LOI, or letter of intent, which lays out how they have valued the company, the time period of revenue, EBITDA, that they will be looking at, any kind of like earnout stipulations, basically the shape of the deal. And from that point, you can decide, who you want to continue, giving more information to in that second phase, because they get much more due diligence after the letter of intent. Also, whether there's a break clause in there. So, is there a penalty for submitting this, or for going into this next phase and then not actually having the transaction? I've still believed that, especially because I learned such a hard lesson at the very beginning of fundraising, that competitive tension is absolutely crucial. So I was very in favor of making sure that we had at least two potential acquirers. I think they called it dual track. No, dual track is when you're looking at IPO at the same time as a private transaction. But basically, I wanted to make sure that up until we signed the deal, there were multiple competing parties in there.
Got it. You're trying to make sure. I'm sure your M&A professional was doing this, trying to make sure that both of those parties, or multiple parties, are roughly at the same stage of their evaluation along the way, so that one's not way ahead than the other, so that they're kind of getting to the same point of their evaluation of your company at the same time. That's part of this art, and not necessarily science, but it's got more art than science. But
No,
you mentioned something.
But that's a really important point that you made, because if one interested party is much further ahead, then the competitive tension doesn't work, because the other party can't bid against them. So it's a really important point that you made.
Yeah. And you also raised something that I want to make sure our listeners understand the difference between. You use the term indication of interest, or IOI, and then a letter of intent, or LOI. Can you just describe qualitatively what the difference between those two things are?
Indication of interest is at the very beginning of an exit process. It's a wider group that could submit one, and it allows them less, or access to a lot less information than a letter of intent. A letter of intent isn't binding, but it's a letter of indication of interest is, we think your company looks great from the marketing materials that we've seen. and we'd like to look a little bit more and have a few conversations. A letter of intent is laying out what the terms will be, subject to proper due diligence and access to a data room.
Yeah, and I've also seen IOIs, indications of interest, usually provide a range of valuation. Like we would pay, generally speaking, between 3 and 4 times revenue for a company of this size. Like they would be a range as opposed to a specific number, whereas an LOI, in my experience, would usually be a specific number. Is that how it worked out for you? Kind of
Yes.
ranges in the IOI and then specific numbers in the LOI? Got it. Okay. So you're evaluating these offers. What went into the evaluation? And again, you may not be able to explain. Obviously, you can't take us inside the boardroom, but what made you decide the offer that you ultimately went with? It's public, so I think we can share that it was 275 million pounds. It's such an enormous amount of money, and for our American listeners, that equates to, given the sterling conversion rates, like more than $400 million. This is a big acquisition. So for folks, what made you decide to go with, I think it's THG, the Hunt Group? What was the decision making around that?
We felt as a board that it was the best. It was the best offer for both our shareholders and our employees. So it was a 100% cash deal. There were no earnouts. There was nothing held back. So, and their offer was similar to the other offer. So price wise. So from the shareholders' perspective, they were no longer going to be dependent and waiting on Cult Beauty's team to perform. There were not going to be mass firings. Everyone that wanted to stay could, but nobody had to. And personally, for me, I had seen THG acquire several of our competitors over the years, and those brands still existed as those brands. Those brands still exist. They also acquired Dermstore, and I don't know if you're familiar with Dermstore. It's big. I think it might be bigger in the US than it is in the UK, but it still has its original ethos and branding. It still looks and sounds like Dermstore. So I wanted to see what I had created, the education first approach and treating women as intelligent beings. So the mission of the company to continue, and THG had demonstrated for more than a decade that they were able and willing and to do that.
Did you contractually commit them to doing that in any way, or was it just a moral kind of, or an understanding in principle that they wouldn't abandon the name, or they would, like, was there any sort of anything in the contract that forced them to do that?
I can't discuss that, but I can say it was very clear from their track record that was their.
Got it. Walk me through your favorite announcement, or letting, you had multiple shareholders, from your aunt to your parents to warehouse workers to, very senior people with lots of experience and, cashed out founders. I mean, I'd love to hear your story of the person whom you told about what their equity was worth, that you most like, or that you most remember.
Oh gosh. Well, all of the shareholders were aware of what their valuation was going to be via communications from the board directly, because we were communicating the cap table, and all of the shareholders needed to agree. So I didn't really kind of I didn't get an opportunity to really break the news to anyone. But several of the employees and co-founders have I've been out to see one of she was able to buy her dream house in Palm Springs, and and her showing me around that was incredible. And my aunt now rents a house on Lake Michigan for 6 weeks. Sorry. It's just so lovely that she says that she believed in me. She rents a house on Lake Michigan for 6 weeks every year. And I don't know why this makes me cry so much. And every year she just says, thank you. I just wouldn't be doing this if it weren't for you. And I mean, she was so wonderful to me when I was growing up, and such a role model. And she was so helpful with just any time, how difficult it is to start and build a business with very little investment and build it up to what it is. She was a sounding board for me with so much calm, cool-headed advice, having run her own successful company. And for me to be able to do something to return the favor. Also, she was the one who just went, oh my gosh, I never thought I was going to get any of this back. And I only just learned maybe a year ago. I didn't realize when my parents invested, the reason they could invest was my grandmother had left my father a little bit of money when she died. And he put his inheritance to back me. Just, so, and I think it's a good thing that I didn't know that, because I would have felt even more pressure than I did, even though he never mentioned it. And they were always presented it as if, we don't expect to see this back. You do your thing. And then my mom told me that, and I was incredibly touched, because that demonstrated the level of trust that my father has in me to put his inheritance behind me was that was pretty incredible.
Must have felt good to be able to deliver on all those investments of relationship equity that they invested in you. It must have felt amazing to be able to give them such a great return.
Yeah. It it's surreal. It's surreal to know that people that I care about, that believed in me and helped me, now have a lot more financial security than they may have ever dreamed of. It's surreal.
It must feel incredible to build such a prominent consumer brand, because we interview people that sold some piece of technology that makes the internet run, and no one's ever heard of it, no one will ever hear of it, and yet they make a truckload of money. In your case, you've built a consumer brand. People know it. Obviously in the UK, people know it very, very well. Certainly some people would know it in the US, but it must feel quite rewarding to be part of the cultural zeitgeist, to be referenced, just to sort of walk around and know that people, know of your brand, whether they know of you or not. Am I capturing that at all for you?
It is quite fun, especially because of the ethos of the brand and the integrity and the trustworthiness, and that we were doing something noble and worthwhile. So to be associated with that's a great introduction. When somebody introduces me as the founder of Cult Beauty, and I see someone's eyes light up because they understand and they've enjoyed the product that I've created, or it's benefited them in some way, that feels really good. When I was thinking about the initial product list for Cult Beauty back in 2007, or actually I think it was 2006, I was reading a fiction kind of beach read, and the author referenced Bobbi Brown's gel eyeliner. And I was like, oh my gosh, this must be a really good eyeliner. Of course, I went out and bought the eyeliner. And And I just thought, I mean, how amazing to create something that gets into the cultural context like that. And then about 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, I got a text from my sister saying, oh my gosh, I just read the latest Lucy Foley book and she talks about cult beauty in it. And I need to get a copy of this book. I just got back from visiting my sister in the US, so I haven't had a chance to get a copy of the book yet. But like that was, I mean, like a pipe dream, like that would never happen. And now it's actually happened. So I really want to get in touch with Lucy Foley and ask her if she will sign a copy for me, because it's the first time I've heard of that happening. And I want to tell her the story of the Bobbi Brown gel eyeliner and just let her know how much that means to me. It's really, I mean,
great.
It's like I said,
Everything comes full circle.
Surreal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hey, are you up for a quick lightning round? I've got 3 or 4 questions that'll just require a short answer, and then we can wrap and let people know where they can find you. You up for that?
Sure.
Okay. What was the slimiest trick that an investor or acquirer tried to play on you? You mentioned earlier that the guy who, the 250,000 pound valuation guy, was that the slimiest, or were there others that
by far?
Point to?
Yeah, that was terrible behavior. Absolutely terrible behavior.
Biggest mistake you personally made in selling your company? If you could have a do-over and do it all over again, specifically the selling phase, what might you do differently?
I was in a slightly difficult situation because I'm a US citizen based in the UK. I would have structured my ownership of my shares differently. I think even though there were investors that owned more of the company than I did when we sold up to like 3 times or 4 times what I did, I wrote the biggest check to the taxman of anyone in the company. So I would have spent a lot of time structuring that.
Great reminder to our listeners to talk to your lawyer, talk to your accountant well in advance of selling. They can save you a lot of money if you get to them early enough in the process. So that's a great reminder for them. I think we were nibbling at the edges here earlier, but what was the emotional high and low of the sale process for you? What was the highest emotional point and what was the lowest?
The lowest was, I can't remember what caused it, but I literally bit off this part of my tooth that I still need to have kept. It happened at my niece's birthday, and I was so tense about something, so I must have been grinding my teeth for quite a while. But so having that come off in her birthday pizza was the low point. The high point was handing it over to THG. The final phone call. This all happened during the pandemic, so everything was remote. So it was just me and our wonderful lawyer Matthew Cowan on the phone with the executives from THG, and just handing over. And they were so excited to be acquiring us, and I was so excited to have accomplished what I set out to accomplish. It was a really wonderful moment.
What did you buy yourself to commemorate the win?
I had always wanted a Cartier tank watch. And my husband and I went into the Cartier shop, because this was like my trophy. And there was another watch that I liked better, and the tank watch didn't look that good on my wrist, but the tank watch is what I had set out to buy. And I don't know, I remember I turned to him and I whispered in his ear, would it be terrible if I bought both of them? And he was like, oh, you absolutely should buy both of them. And we laughed afterwards, because we think that the salesman thought I was asking for permission to buy both watches. And then I actually ended up wearing the other watch. I wear that one all the time, and I never wear the tank one, but I have it. It's my trophy.
I love it. Awesome. I'm a big fan of having a something to commemorate the win. So I appreciate you sharing. Um, you sold your business for 275 million pounds. What are you up to now? What's going on? How are you killing time? Where is your focus now these days?
There is there are so many opportunities. There's so many things happening. I have a chief of staff who is helping me build another consumer brand. This time it's
Oh,
manufacturing and it's in the wellness space, but it's also around removing toxic materials from, this time is for athletic wear. So there's a
hmm.
surprising amount of plastics in BPA, and it's can be really disruptive for your endocrine system and just obvious, and also uh, the microplastics that are just ending up everywhere. It's terrible for the environment, but also, and I don't know if you've seen this, but the Department of Justice is suing Ticketmaster and Live Nation for monopolistic practices. And I think there's a really interesting use case for blockchain in that area because ticket prices that people are actually paying bear very little relationship to the actual face value. And then there's this whole murky, opaque uh, communication and system around it. And I'd love to see blockchain having a full kind of chain of custody, if you will, so that we can figure out where that's going wrong. And it's very similar to what Cult Beauty was doing. I don't know if I'm going to be the person to bring that to market, but I'm very interested. I think that's very interesting, and I'm quite excited to see that uh, how that lawsuit settles because I think there's a lot of room to improve the experience for both the artist and the fans in live music entertainment.
And you're also becoming quite an outspoken advocate for women entrepreneurs. Tell me about that.
Well, women women fronted teams get approximately 2% of all VC funds. Mixed teams get about 18%, and then male fronted teams get the remaining 80. I think that investing in women, as you can see from the 157 that I was able to return to my shareholders, is a pretty underappreciated and untapped opportunity. Basically, our valuations are lower than male fronted teams because there's literally less competition. So I think there's a huge opportunity for female fronted companies to be incredibly successful and make their investors a lot of money. So, and also that brings more products to market that solve problems for women, but also give women more financial stability, which I think improves the world for everyone. So I am hoping that by being vocal about the success of Cult Beauty and the success of the financial success of investing in a company that is very focused towards a female audience, there's just I can highlight how much room there is still to go. Men control 80% of the capital in the world. So a lot there, not to say that there aren't great products that are still out there to be developed for men. But I think there's a lot of, and I hate to use this term, I apologize for the management consultant speak. I think there's a lot of low hanging fruit in my demographic. And so I would just encourage, I'd encourage anyone who's actively looking to invest to consider companies that are serving women because it's a huge opportunity.
And you make a great case, both in your description, but also that you've lived it, and you have returned to your investors such an incredible return. So you're an amazing example for others. Is there a place that people can reach out to you if they wanted to say hi on social media? Are you kind of Instagram or LinkedIn? What's the best way for folks to say hi?
I am LinkedIn is probably the best place. I'm on Instagram. I haven't posted anything since the sale. So I'm not that active on there, but you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I have an assistant and PR team that I can connect. I can connect people with as well.
Awesome. So we'll put Jessica's LinkedIn connection and all the links associated with the show today at builttosell.com. Jessica, thanks for doing this.
It was really nice to meet you, John. Thanks for having me.